Reading 36 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice Nicoll, Volume 2. Birdlip, September 2nd, 1944. Commentary on Chief Feature. Sometimes it is necessary to start more small octaves in one's life. All octaves must begin with the do, and this means that in order to start something, one must begin, actually. One's life as it passes easily contracts if one simply turns around in the interests one has already, which may become mechanical habits. On one occasion, O said it was necessary to have many irons in the fire. He was speaking of the difficulty of getting beyond some present stage of oneself, or of getting on further with one's aim. He said, octaves can give shocks to one another. You may stop at mi fa in one octave, but another octave may give the right shock to the first. By going on with something else, you may be able to get on with what you started first of all. The difference is like playing the same tune on a few well-worn strings and filling the need of a larger instrument with more strings. However, it is not easy to get one. We become creatures of mechanical habits long before we realize it. Then what one calls new experiences are really the same as before, the same tune. They fall in the same place. All this is held together by the chief feature, which governs the personality. What one believes is new is really the same, because it leads, as before, to chief feature, which must be satisfied and will not release us without very much trouble and indeed humiliation on our part. However, it is possible to begin to free oneself from this ruler of earth, that is, of one's personality, which is one's earth, and to begin to experience another voice, another sense of one's life, another feeling of oneself, another idea, another view of what it is all about. The ordinary circle of things in our lives, in turning continually, daily, weekly, yearly, brings us to the same points in sequence. As the special memory, the consciousness of oneself, grows through uncritical self-observation, the taste of this always returning to the same points, this taste of recurrence in life, becomes stronger until it is stronger than the attraction of the points one revisits, which have in the interim grown fresh graces. All this is very confusing for a long time unless one realizes that in this constant returning and the consciousness of it, one can have a new attitude and a new way of and a new way of reacting to the old. The effect on oneself may then change. The things, the events, may not change very much, but to change anything in oneself, there is always this obscure problem of the chief feature which governs us, as we are, and holds us to the same circle. One may sense after a time that something always seems to keep us where we are long before we can see what it is. Why, one may ask, am I always here at the same place? This is no handicap for many. Many prefer the same. Now, ordinary memory is very short. In the work memory, this returning of familiar experiences may begin to awaken one to oneself because it becomes a source of an inner flatness or even misery. One may become aware of where one is in this turning circle and remember how one was there before, and before, and before, away back into the past. This is an expansion of consciousness already. One says to oneself, I have been here before. Even so, the power of the point of the event one is at is too strong with this slight insight. Why, one says, should I not be here again? This will not, of course, occur if one has no sense of the turning circle of oneself, one's life. The illusion of being free and able to do what one wants, the illusion of time going straight on as if to new things, instead of seeing that time is repetition and so a circle. This illusion we hold in spite of the self-evident circle of day and night, summer and winter, that the mere passage of time will bring us what we dream of. All this makes it difficult to understand oneself and one's life and what has happened and is happening to one. Now, the approach to beginning to see chief feature depends on one's power of enduring it. We forget how sensitive we are to the slightest discouragement or criticism, and how very difficult it is to endure any loss of esteem, even if we imagine we are either hardened or have full self-knowledge. In no case can anyone be told his or her chief feature, because no one would believe it, and then no one could stand it. The action of the work gradually brings an individual to the point of catching glimpses of it. It is like being undermined. It is incredible. It is like being accused of theft or murder or criminal lying. Not only is it very painful, but at first impossible. However, it is true. What does true mean? All truth is relative to one's power of comprehending it. To be told that something is true, when one cannot see it and is 1,000 miles away from the power of seeing it, does not make it true for us. Truth is a development. That is why all truth must be relative to the power of being able to see it. Take, for example, a phrase like this from some ancient book of Indian esotericism. Quote, "By the delusion of the pairs of opposites that spring from desire and from hate, all born beings fall into bewilderment." Unquote. Who can see for himself the truth of this truth? No one is ready yet to see it, so it has no power over anyone. For one must have the power to see the truth of a truth, in order that it may have power over one. Just to hear, it is nothing. Anyone can hear anything with his ears. To hear with the mind is another and a very long matter. And finally, to hear with the understanding is a still longer matter. But in that case, the truth can begin to exert power over one's life. And that again is a long matter. How much stands in between? Can we believe that the chief feature in each of us is going to let us understand truths that are utterly opposed to its hidden power over us? Can you, in ordinary life, turn out people who hold supreme official posts and have done so for years as easily as that? It is the same thing. The chief feature is not to be turned out of office easily. He is established where he is, and he is not going to let go his hold upon you, and you are entirely in his power, and he knows very well how to conceal himself and how to argue with you reasonably and make out that he only wishes to help you. He will make it difficult for you to start new octaves, new interests. He will always explain why it is silly or unnecessary and so on, especially if you try to start something that might weaken his power directly. As long as he is satisfied, you will feel satisfied. You will feel at peace with the world of yourself. However, this work is not to make us feel at peace with ourselves as we are. There is another peace described as passing all understanding. But we do not possess that peace as yet, and certainly cannot as we are. The kind of small, mean peace we feel is very different. When we awaken a little, we feel less of this somewhat smug, small peace. I said above that our power of seeing chief feature depends upon our power of enduring it. The work does not allow us to go beyond ourselves. If you can understand the expression, since chief feature belongs to our being, and since work on being is only possible by self-observation, we cannot expect to catch a glimpse of chief feature unless we have begun to see our level of being. What does it mean to begin to see our level of being, which has attracted our life? Certainly, mere isolated observations of oneself will not make it possible for us to catch a glimpse of our level of being. And you must also remember that it would be impossible to catch a glimpse of one's level of being unless one could endure it. Now, the only way that you can endure it is by having something else that you can hold on to. If you have something else that you value and that you can hold on to and trust, you can then endure a certain amount of devaluation of yourself. In other words, you may be able to endure catching a glimpse from time to time of your level of being. These glimpses run very far back. They do not begin until the stage of taking mental photographs has been reached. Isolated, momentary self-observation is like turning a small flash lamp onto a small part of the room that one lives in. But a mental photograph is like seeing a number of things together in the room, in a certain relation to each other, just for a moment. Suppose that you have observed yourself for some considerable time, and you begin to see yourself over the period of time acting in a certain way. You see how something starts, leads to something else, and so on. In fact, you see yourself in action, in movement, so to speak, inner and outer, in some typical way of behavior. This is a photograph. You can say that it is a photograph of an eye, or that it is a photograph of a group of eyes, of some subdivision of the personality, of a personality in your personality. G once said that it was necessary to collect a large number of photographs of oneself and keep them in an album so that one could see them together. Now, seeing one's level of being means, of course, an increase of consciousness, an increase of self-consciousness. As consciousness grows, the result is always a greater power of seeing together. What you saw as separate and apparently without relation becomes connected to form a larger design, and from this larger design you see another meaning. Just as in fitting together the bits of a jigsaw puzzle, you suddenly begin to see the picture emerging and see what it means. Now, for all this to take place, it is necessary to make continual contributions to one's consciousness, even although one does not apparently get results. The work teaches us the method whereby results can be obtained if we apply the method. But how and when the results will come belongs to the inner action of the work itself, which always remains an incomprehensible secret to us. The method tells us to observe ourselves and become more conscious. Now, when these photographs begin to form themselves, the next stage is that one notices flashes of insight into one's life that go far back. Then one begins to become more conscious of one's level of being, of the kind of person one has been all this time and has never seen owing to the action of buffers. Now is the time when it begins to be possible to gain some idea of what one's chief feature is. When this stage is reached, you will be uncertain whether it is one out of three things as a starting point. Now, at this stage, you will notice a great decline in confidence, both in yourself and in things in general. You will feel an inner weakness and will have to be careful about certain new forms of negative emotion. Another thing that you will begin to notice is that the necessity of the work becomes far stronger. You notice that it is all quite true and that you cannot ignore it. If you have not prepared yourself for this stage, if you have not done the work that you ought to have done, and you meet this stage, you will inevitably collapse, simply because you have got to a place which you should never have got into. You will begin to try to swim before you have learnt how to swim. Now, as regards the kinds of things that form chief feature in the first place, they are never nice things, I mean that they are, when you begin to see them, all of such a nature that they are unpleasant. I do not mean horrible. You may feel moments of horror when you realize that such unpleasant things have been woven through your life, but no doubt you could get quite accustomed to them again and not notice that they are unpleasant, provided you have not really awakened to them, because it is impossible to die to them unless one has awakened to them. To gradually wake up to chief feature is a preliminary to dying to it, or causing it to die. And you will remember that the right order of these things was talked about once by G when he spoke of the idea of rebirth in the Gospels. He said that there were many references to dying, rebirth, and awakening in the Gospels, but that they were not in the right order. First, he said, a man must awaken before he can die to himself, and then by dying to himself, he can be reborn. Now, since the chief feature is the axle round which everything in us turns, it is clear that if one wishes really to change, this central axle must be taken out, as it were. In that case, something else must hold the person together. But we have to consider the whole process as gradual and not sudden. There must be something to hold on to so that you can let go. If your life in life is very important to you, you will find it difficult to let go. If you do let go, your friends may not recognize you. Here it is necessary to act, if it is possible to do so. If by means of work over a long period a man begins to awaken to himself, he is going in the direction of awakening to his chief feature. He is on that journey. It would be foolish for him to attempt to die to himself without having worked. Some people have attempted this by terrible forms of asceticism. They have attempted to die to themselves without having awakened, and although they have made second body, they have simply become things, what G called immortal things. All the work that we do at present is connected with awakening to ourselves, with becoming more aware of ourselves, with letting light in to ourselves. Consciousness is light. If you begin to observe yourself uncritically, you let in light. Eventually, this light will show up chief feature, but not until you have caught hold of the rope, of something to hold you. If you are going to shift yourself from one place, you must prepare another place to stand on. I would advise you all not to identify with the words chief feature. Try simply to understand that everything, all your reactions, your attitudes, your behavior, your thoughts and feelings, revolve round a central axle, which keeps them fixed. If one can see one of these spokes, it is like taking a photograph. Then one sees another spoke, and so on. They all lead to the same thing in the center. Remember finally that no one can see his or her chief feature unless he or she is ready for it.